Blood pooled on the marble floor, but Salvatore Ricci, the most feared underboss in Chicago, did not flinch. He only had eyes for the plus-sized nurse wiping down his paralyzed legs. Anyone else who dared touch him lost a hand. But her? He would burn down the city to keep her safe. The penthouse overlooking the magnificent mile was supposed to be a sanctuary, but it felt more like a tomb. For 3 weeks, Salvatore Ricci, the heir to the Ricci crime family, had been trapped within its bulletproof glass walls. A car bomb rigged by the Sterling Syndicate had failed to take his life, but it had succeeded in severing his absolute control. The blast had left him paralyzed from the waist down, a jagged piece of shrapnel embedded perilously close to his spinal cord. The doctors called it a temporary spinal contusion. But to a man who ruled the Chicago underworld through fear and physical dominance, the wheelchair was a death sentence. Salvatore became a waged beast. He fired a dozen private nurses in 14 days. Most ran out crying, terrified by the cold, dead look in his eyes or the violent outbursts when they tried to move his legs. He suffered from severe nerve pain, a condition that made every touch feel like grinding glass. But more than the physical pain, he hated their pity. He hated the way their hands trembled when they changed his dressings. He was the devil of the Gold Coast, and he refused to be handled like a fragile, broken thing. Enter Serena Caruso. Serena was not a typical private caregiver. She was a former trauma nurse at Cook County Hospital, a woman who had spent the last 5 years digging bullets out of gangbangers and sewing up knife wounds before the police could arrive. She had lost her hospital job after refusing to let a corrupt detective interrogate a bleeding teenager in her ward. Now she worked for a discreet underground medical agency, patching up men who could not afford to be seen in an emergency room. When Serena stepped out of the private elevator and into the Ricci penthouse, she immediately commanded the space. She was a plus-sized woman, thick-thighed and deeply curvy, carrying her weight with an unshakable, grounded confidence. Where the other nurses had been slight, nervous, and quick to cower, Serena was solid. She did not shrink herself to make others comfortable. She wore dark green medical scrubs that hugged her hips and a calm expression that completely ignored the 3 armed guards standing by the doorway. The master bedroom was a disaster zone. A silver water pitcher lay dented against the far wall. A terrified, waif-like nurse was squeezing past Serena to get to the elevator, sobbing into her hands. In the center of the massive room, sitting in a custom-built medical bed, was Salvatore. His chest was bare, wrapped in white bandages that contrasted sharply with his olive skin and the dark, sprawling tattoos of the Ricci Syndicate. His dark hair was disheveled, his jaw covered in a thick shadow of stubble. His eyes, black and bottomless, locked onto Serena as she walked in. "Get out!" Salvatore growled, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that usually sent grown men to their knees. "I told my men no more nurses. I don't need a babysitter." Serena did not stop walking. She set her heavy medical bag on the mahogany dresser, opened it, and began pulling out sterile gloves, saline solution, and fresh gauze. "I am not a babysitter, Mr. Ricci," Serena said, her voice smooth and entirely devoid of fear. "I am a trauma specialist, and unless you want that incision on your lower back to turn necrotic and kill you before Lionel Sterling gets the chance, you are going to let me do my job." The room went dead silent. The guards by the door shifted uncomfortably, waiting for Salvatore to order them to throw her off the balcony. No one spoke the name of the rival British-American crime lord who had planted the bomb. It was a forbidden subject in the penthouse. Salvatore stared at her, his jaw clenching. He took in her soft, full face, the unapologetic curve of her body, and the steady, capable way her hands organized her supplies. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't looking at his motionless legs with sorrow. She was looking at him like a puzzle she was about to solve. "If you touch me, I will break your wrists," Salvatore whispered, a lethal promise. Serena walked over to the bed. She stood over him, her presence warm and imposing. She didn't flinch away from his glare. Instead, she reached down and gently but firmly placed her bare hand on his right knee. Salvatore braced for the agonizing, white-hot shock of nerve pain that usually accompanied human contact. He braced for the instinct to lash out. But the pain didn't come. Serena's hand was warm, heavy, and steady. The deep pressure she applied seemed to bypass the misfiring nerve endings. It was the touch of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, an anchor in the chaotic storm of his ruined body. Salvatore let out a ragged breath he didn't realize he was holding. The tension drained from his broad shoulders. He looked up at her, utterly bewildered by the sudden quiet in his own nervous system. "See?" Serena said softly, though her eyes remained entirely professional. "You're still in one piece. Now roll over. We have work to do." From that moment, a silent, unbreakable rule was established in the Ricci Empire. No one touched the boss, only the nurse. A month passed, and the dynamic in the penthouse shifted into something intense and consuming. Serena moved into the guest suite across the hall. She became the gatekeeper to the most dangerous man in Chicago. Salvatore was running his empire from his wheelchair now. The sprawling living room of the penthouse had been converted into a war room. Capos and lieutenants came and went, whispering reports of shipments at the docks, cash drops in the South Side, and the encroaching movements of the Sterling Syndicate. Lionel Sterling, the ruthless, sharply tailored mastermind behind the black market weapons trade, had realized Salvatore was still alive. Lionel was hungry for the Ricci territory, and the streets were bleeding because of it. During these meetings, Salvatore was a monster. He ordered executions without blinking. He demanded brutal retaliation against Sterling's men, his voice echoing off the glass walls with a terrifying ferocity. He was merciless, sharp, and deeply paranoid. But the moment the men left, and Serena walked into the room carrying his medications or a tray of food, the air in the room changed entirely. The vicious Mafia boss would soften. His dark eyes would track her every movement, watching the sway of her hips, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the gentle but firm way she handled his damaged body. It wasn't just a medical dependency anymore. It was an absolute, blinding obsession. Salvatore found himself craving her proximity. He insisted she eat her meals with him. When his insomnia kept him awake, staring at the city lights and burning with thoughts of vengeance against Lionel Sterling, he would demand Serena sit in the leather armchair by his bed, just so he could listen to the steady rhythm of her breathing. He was deeply protective of her, a fact the syndicate learned the hard way. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. One of Salvatore's older capos, a man named Vincenzo, who had never respected the new generation, came to the penthouse to deliver a ledger. Serena was in the kitchen area, making a protein shake for Salvatore. Vincenzo, thinking he was out of earshot, muttered a crude insult in Sicilian to another soldier, mocking Serena's heavy figure, implying the boss had gone blind to let a woman of her size play nursemaid. Salvatore had heard him. The reaction was instantaneous. Salvatore wheeled himself forward, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair with such force, his knuckles turned white. He didn't yell. He simply signaled his personal bodyguard to lock the penthouse doors. In front of a horrified Serena, Salvatore had Vincenzo dragged to the center of the room. He forced the older capo to his knees. Salvatore leaned forward from his chair, his eyes devoid of humanity, and pressed the barrel of a customized 1911 pistol against Vincenzo's forehead. You breathe her air, you speak her name, you even look at her shadow, and I will cut your tongue out and feed it to the dogs, Salvatore whispered. His voice was like grinding stones. If she tells you to jump, you ask how high. If she needs a bridge to walk on, you lay down in the dirt. Do you understand me? Vincenzo, trembling and pale, nodded frantically. Salvatore pistol-whipped him across the jaw, leaving him bleeding on the carpet, before having him thrown out of the building. Serena had watched the violence unfold, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew who Salvatore was, but seeing his capacity for violence unleashed directly in her defense stirred something dark and complicated inside her. She wasn't repulsed. Deep down, beneath her professional exterior, she felt a dangerous, thrilling warmth. In a world that had constantly overlooked her, undervalued her, or judged her for taking up space, this terrifying man viewed her as royalty. But the bubble they lived in was bound to burst. Lionel Sterling had spies in the city, and word quickly reached him that the untouchable Salvatore Ricci had a weakness, a plus-sized civilian nurse who never left his side. Sterling, a man who thrived on psychological warfare, realized that the best way to break the Ricci family wasn't to bomb Salvatore again. It was to take the one thing keeping him sane. The tension in the penthouse escalated. Security doubled. Salvatore refused to let Serena stand near the windows. It all came to a head late one evening. Serena was preparing to change the bandages on Salvatore's back and shoulder. The nerve pain had been worse that day, due to a storm rolling in off Lake Michigan, making Salvatore irritable and quiet. He took off his silk black shirt, revealing the map of ink and scars that covered his muscular torso. Serena usually focused purely on the surgical sites, keeping her mind clinical. But tonight, as she wiped down his right shoulder with an antiseptic cloth, Salvatore leaned forward, exposing his upper back and the side of his ribs. Serena froze. The cloth slipped from her fingers, dropping onto the hardwood floor with a soft slap. There, etched deeply into his ribcage, was an old, distinctive scar. It was a jagged line that intersected with a circular, star-shaped burn mark. It wasn't a gang tattoo. It was a crude, brutal brand, the signature of a specific enforcer from the Sterling Syndicate. But that wasn't why Serena stopped breathing. 10 years ago, before she was a nurse, before she lived in the city, Serena had been caught in the crossfire of a gang shootout in a dark alley in Little Italy. She had been a terrified teenager, shielding her younger brother. A masked man in a dark trench coat had dragged her behind a dumpster just as a spray of bullets hit the brick wall. A Sterling enforcer had cornered them, swinging a heated pipe and a hunting knife. The masked man had thrown his body over hers, taking the blade and the burn to his own ribs to protect a girl he didn't even know. He had killed the enforcer, scooped her up, and carried her to the edge of the street before vanishing into the night. Serena had never forgotten the shape of that wound. She had spent a decade wanting to thank the ghost who saved her life. She stared at Salvatore's back, her hands trembling for the very first time. The ruthless Mafia boss, the man who ordered hits over breakfast, the man who was currently paralyzed in the bed in front of her, was the phantom savior from her nightmares. Salvatore felt her stop. He felt the sudden spike of anxiety in the air. He turned his head, his dark eyes narrowing as he looked at her pale face. "Serena?" he asked, his voice low, dropping the harshness he used for the rest of the world. "What is it? Why are you shaking?" Serena reached out, her fingertips gently tracing the edge of the star-shaped scar on his ribs. She saw the muscles in his back tense under her touch, not from pain, but from the sudden, profound intimacy. 10 years ago," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Little Italy, behind the old bakery. You took a knife for a chubby teenager crying in the dirt." Salvatore froze. The air in the room seemed to vanish. He turned fully to look at her, his eyes wide, absorbing the reality of who she was. The puzzle pieces snapped together in his mind. The reason her touch had instantly calmed him weeks ago. The reason he felt an inexplicable, soul-deep pull toward her from the moment she walked into the room. Before he could speak, before he could confess the truth he had just realized, a massive explosion rocked the foundation of the building, shattering the bulletproof glass of the penthouse and plunging them into total darkness. Lionel Sterling had finally made his move. The blast wave threw Serena backward. She hit the hardwood floor hard, all the air rushing out of her lungs in a violent whoosh. The deafening roar of the explosion was followed immediately by the terrifying sound of shattering glass and groaning metal as the penthouse windows blew inward, raining razor-sharp shards across the room. Plaster dust plumed into the air, choking thick and white, while the emergency sprinklers instantly hissed to life, drenching the ruined master bedroom in freezing water. Over the ringing in her ears, Serena heard the sharp, mechanical clack of a slide being pulled back on a handgun. She blinked through the sting of dust and water. Through the gloom, illuminated only by the flickering red strobe of the emergency backup lights, she saw Salvatore. He was still in the medical bed, his torso covered in a layer of grey debris. He had not panicked. He had reached under his mattress and produced 2 heavy Glock pistols, his eyes scanning the smoke-filled doorway with the predatory calm of a man who had been expecting a war. "Serena," Salvatore barked, his voice cutting through the chaos like a whip. "Are you hit?" "I am fine," she coughed, forcing herself onto her hands and knees. She checked herself quickly. No deep lacerations, no broken bones. Her heavy build and the thick material of her scrubs had shielded her from the worst of the flying glass. "Stay on the floor and crawl to the service hallway," Salvatore ordered, aiming his weapons at the main door. Lionel sent a breach team. They blew the reinforced doors. "My men in the hall are dead. They will be in this room in 30 seconds. Go, Serena. Now." "I am not leaving you," she said, her voice dropping into the absolute, unshakable calm she used when the emergency room devolved into total madness. "Serena, you cannot move me fast enough," Salvatore snarled, his chest heaving. "I am dead weight. You get out of here. Get out of here." "That is an order." "I do not take orders from you," she snapped back. She crawled rapidly across the glass-strewn floor to the side of the bed. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her hands were completely steady. She found his custom titanium wheelchair, thankfully upright, and locked the wheels. "I survived Little Italy because of you," she said, grabbing his heavy, muscular arm and throwing it over her shoulder. "I am not letting Lionel Sterling finish the job he started 10 years ago." On 3. 1, 2, 3, Salvatore cursed, but he did not fight her. Serena braced her wide stance, engaging the power in her solid legs and core, and heaved. Salvatore was a massive man, pure muscle and heavy bone, and his lower half offered zero assistance. A smaller, weaker nurse would have buckled under his weight, but Serena was strong, built for endurance and leverage. With a raw grunt of exertion, she pulled him from the mattress, swung his dead weight across the gap, and slammed him down safely into the seat of the wheelchair. Just as she strapped his legs onto the footrests, the bedroom door was kicked entirely off its hinges. 3 tactical mercenaries, clad in black body armor, stormed into the room. Assault rifles raised with laser sights, cutting through the smoke. Salvatore did not hesitate. He fired a rapid succession of shots. The booming echoes of his handguns filled the enclosed space, deafening and precise. The first 2 mercenaries dropped instantly, their armor useless against Salvatore's lethal accuracy to their unprotected necks and faces. The 3rd mercenary dove behind the overturned mahogany dresser, spraying bullets wildly into the ceiling and walls. "Move!" Salvatore roared. Serena grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. She pushed with everything she had, driving the heavy chair forward through the debris, dodging a hail of gunfire that shredded the wall behind them. They burst into the private corridor, connecting to the penthouse elevator bank. The main elevators were dead, their cables likely severed by the blast. "The panic room," Salvatore pointed down the hall. Behind the bookshelf, Serena pushed him down the long corridor, the friction of the ruined carpet slowing them down. She leaned all her weight into the effort, her muscles burning, her breath coming in heavy gasps. She could hear heavy boots pounding up the emergency stairwell. Sterling had sent an army. They reached the end of the hall. Salvatore reached up, pressing a hidden biometric scanner disguised as a light switch. A heavy section of the wall clicked and slid open, revealing a steel-reinforced elevator that dropped directly to the subterranean parking garage. "Get in," Salvatore ordered. Serena shoved the chair inside, but before she could step in after him, a massive figure stepped out from the stairwell. It was a Sterling enforcer, wielding a suppressed submachine gun. He saw them and raised his weapon. Salvatore raised his Glock, but the slide locked back. Empty. He reached for his second weapon, but the enforcer was already stepping forward, aiming directly at Serena's back. Serena did not freeze. Her hand darted to the pocket of her scrubs, her fingers wrapping around the heavy, solid steel barrel of a portable oxygen regulator she had shoved in there during her shift. As the enforcer lunged to grab her, Serena pivoted on her heel, dropping her center of gravity. She swung the heavy steel cylinder with explosive force, smashing it directly into the side of the enforcer's knee. The bone snapped with the sickening crunch. The massive man howled in pain, dropping to the floor. Before he could raise his gun again, Serena kicked the weapon out of his hands, grabbed the collar of his tactical vest, and threw him backward into the hallway wall with astonishing strength. She stepped backward into the secret elevator and slammed her fist onto the emergency close button. The steel doors slid shut, sealing them in absolute darkness, just as another volley of bullets ricocheted against the outside metal. The elevator began its rapid descent, the hum of the internal motor, the only sound in the suffocating black space. Serena leaned back against the steel wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, gasping for air. Her hands were finally shaking. In the darkness, she heard the soft whir of the wheelchair turning toward her. A moment later, she felt Salvatore's large, rough hand find her face. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, wiping away a smear of plaster dust. His touch was incredibly gentle, completely at odds with the violent killer he had been seconds ago. "You saved my life," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "We are even now, boss," she breathed, leaning her cheek into the palm of his hand. "No," Salvatore replied quietly in the dark. "We are far from even. You are mine now, Serena." Sterling just signed his own death warrant. The secret elevator deposited them in a forgotten maintenance tunnel beneath the South Loop. Within an hour, Salvatore's loyalist capos had extracted them, sweeping them into an armored convoy and bringing them to an impenetrable safe house located in an abandoned meat-packing warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The warehouse was a fortress. Dozens of heavily armed Ricci soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their faces grim, waiting for the order to strike. Inside the makeshift command center, Serena finished dressing a new laceration on Salvatore's shoulder. The room was sparsely furnished, smelling of stale concrete and heavy rain filtering in from outside. Salvatore sat in his chair, a fresh black shirt draped over his massive frame. He had not taken his eyes off her since they left the elevator. When she finished tying off the bandage, she stepped back, but Salvatore caught her wrist. He pulled her forward, forcing her to stand between his knees. 10 years, he murmured, looking up at her, the memory settling heavily between them. I was a young soldier running collections in Little Italy. I heard the gunfire. I saw a girl shielding her brother from a monster. I did what I had to do. I never expected to see you again, let alone have you put me back together. You gave me the courage to become a trauma nurse, Serena admitted, her voice soft but unwavering. I wanted to be the person who patched up the people the rest of the world left to bleed. I just never thought the man who needed saving would be the devil of the Gold Coast. Salvatore let out a dark, low chuckle. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms tightly around her waist, pressing his face into her stomach. He breathed her in, grounding himself in her solid, unyielding presence. For a man who had felt completely powerless and broken for a month, holding her made him feel invincible. She ran her fingers through his dark, disheveled hair, soothing him. The power dynamic in the room was electric, entirely inverted from the typical Mafia hierarchy. The terrifying boss was bowing to his nurse, finding his only peace in her hands. Suddenly, the steel doors of the command center groaned open. Vincenzo, the capo who had insulted Serena weeks ago and suffered Salvatore's wrath, walked in. He kept his eyes respectfully lowered, staring strictly at the concrete floor. "Boss," Vincenzo said, his voice tight with anticipation. "We found him. Lionel Sterling is trying to flee the city. He is at a private airstrip in Gary, Indiana. He only has a skeleton crew of guards with him. The blast exhausted his local resources." Salvatore lifted his head. The soft, vulnerable look in his eyes vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, hollow void of pure violence. "Prepare the convoy," Salvatore ordered. "I am going." An hour later, the rain was coming down in sheets as the Ricci syndicate descended on the private airstrip. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Salvatore's men outnumbered Sterling's remaining guards 10-1. They swept through the hangars like ghosts, silencing the opposition with ruthless efficiency. Serena sat in the back of an armored SUV parked at the edge of the tarmac, watching through the bulletproof glass. She was terrified, but she could not look away. Salvatore's men dragged Lionel Sterling out of a private jet, throwing the sharp-suited British crime lord onto the wet asphalt. Sterling was bleeding from a cut above his eye, his arrogant demeanor finally cracking as he looked at the black vans surrounding him. The rear doors of a modified transport van opened, and a hydraulic lift lowered Salvatore's wheelchair onto the tarmac. Salvatore rolled himself forward, the heavy rain instantly soaking his clothes and hair. He stopped 10 feet from where Sterling was kneeling in the puddles. "You look pathetic in that chair, Ricci," Sterling spat, coughing up blood. "You should have burned in that penthouse with your fat little whore of a nurse." Salvatore did not flinch. He did not yell. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out his customized 1911 pistol. "You made 2 mistakes, Lionel," Salvatore said, his voice projecting over the sound of the pouring rain and the idling jet engines. The first mistake was thinking my legs were what made me a monster. Salvatore cocked the hammer back. The second mistake, he continued, his eyes dead and unblinking, was breathing the same air as my woman. Salvatore pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed across the empty airstrip, final and deafening. Lionel Sterling crumpled to the wet asphalt, lifeless before he even hit the ground. Salvatore stared at the body for a long moment, ensuring his empire was secure, ensuring the threat to Serena was extinguished forever. He signaled his men to clean up the mess and turned his chair back toward the armored SUV. When he was loaded back into the vehicle, soaking wet and shivering from the adrenaline drop, Serena did not hesitate. She wrapped a thick wool blanket around his shoulders and pulled him against her chest. "It is over," Salvatore whispered into her neck, his hands gripping her scrubs like a lifeline. "The city is ours. You are safe." "I was always safe with you," Serena answered, kissing the crown of his damp head. He looked up at her, his dark eyes filled with absolute, terrifying devotion. The paralyzed Mafia boss and the trauma nurse who refused to be broken. She was the only one who could touch him, the only one who commanded his dark heart, and as he rested his head against her chest, listening to her steady heartbeat, Salvatore Ricci knew he was finally a king who had found his queen. If this gripping dark Mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and share this video with your fellow romance lovers. What did you think of Serena's hidden past and her fearless stand against the Sterling Syndicate? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another intense, high-stakes story. We have plenty more gritty underworld tales coming your way.